Redick for three. Oh, wow! Holy cow!
He can absolutely shoot it.
Redick, the guy that opposing fans love to hate.
And we all have seen what JJ Redick can do when he's open.
Redick comes down the lane, lays it up. No, he missed it.
JJ has it. Fires in time for the win. That's the first win!
JJ Redick's story was one that was hard to label. He was a college basketball star with one of the greatest runs in NCAA history, turned most hated man in basketball, turned NBA bust, turned all-time shooter, turned top media personality. He had more up and downs than just about any player I've ever seen, and his come-up story is one that adds to the movie-like script that he created. He came out of where no one comes out of in rural Virginia, ripping up the dirt roads. It really wasn't much to write home about, and for most, this is all that they'll ever know. His family was big and competitive, and this led him to getting into basketball. He spent ridiculous hours playing in the driveway through rain or snow, and this was where his game was pretty much defined from the jump. He got used to shooting over tree branches and all the goofy gimmicks that come with driveway basketball, and this really benefited him being able to shoot the ball no matter the situation. He was obsessed with the game and he found his team. He fell in love with the Duke team, ran by Christian Laettner in the early 90s. The energy of the Duke Arena, the legacy, the brotherhood that they put together, he wanted a piece of that. He was just 8 years old and he decided he was going to be a part of the Duke story. He dedicated himself to where he decided he was going to go, and he was a phenomenal baseball player. I mean, he lost just one game in his life, and he quit it on a whim just because he wanted to leave nothing on the table in his basketball career. When he got to high school, it was apparent that the work in the driveway amounted to something. At 6'1" and 150 pounds after a buffet, he was on the varsity team. He was a smart player, he could finish pretty well, and he was kinda crafty, but one thing was apparent: this guy had a strap. He shot with unreal confidence, and it didn't matter the situation. He pulled shots out of the most awkward or unusual situations. And this guy's jump shot was just picture perfect. Set his feet on a dime, dip, high release point, follows through pretty perfectly. He wasn't the most talented player in the world, but he was realistically as good as a semi-athletic, mid to undersized kid could be at this level. He took a senior spot in the starting rotation partway through the year and put up 18 as a freshman. Virginia took notice of the kid who was torching up gyms in a town that this just doesn't happen. He started to garner college attention, and through the help of his parents got onto a very elite 17 UAAU team, winning 2 national championships during their time. He was getting a lot of buzz. People were falling in love with the kid. I mean, he was just a dog, but the one that mattered finally came along. A brand new Duke scout found his first job watching JJ go to work, and he fell in love with the aura of confidence that this guy had. Coach K was on board, and JJ was the youngest commit in Duke history his sophomore year, but the job wasn't done yet. JJ went on to have a killer career. It was packed gyms for 4 years, and after a disappointing loss in the sections his junior year, he apparently was done losing. His senior year was cut short by a plantar fascia tear, and by the advice of his doctor and family, his career was over in high school. Pack it up, recover, and go to Duke. But there's no way in hell that this was happening. He kept going out there and kept getting buckets, 30, 40 bombs every night. He re-injured it in the state semis before going out and winning the state championship on a black and blue foot with a 43-point performance. He was one of the best prospects in the country. He was checking off career accomplishments like a grocery list. Duke commit, check. State champ, check. All-American, check. Hell, he was the MVP of the All-American game, with guys like Carmelo Anthony and Amari Stoudemire playing. This had all the signs of one crazy college career, but I don't think anyone could have predicted the nut show that was about to go on. His freshman year was an adjustment. The kid was one of the best shooters in the country, but there's more to the game than that. Guys were playing a whole lot quicker than he was used to in rural Virginia, and he had to get used to that. Over time, he was better, and at times he was the best player on the floor during this year. His 30-point explosion in the ACC championship to help lead a double-digit comeback started to put him on the map nationally. In his sophomore season, he kept it going at 16 a game on 42, 40, and 95 splits. JJ was that guy. Pretending he was draining big shots for the Blue Devils in his driveway for years turned to him doing the real thing. He was on top of the world, and he really acted like it. He didn't go to class all semester. He partied like he was the president of the fraternity, and in his words, lived very selfishly. After a pretty poor performance in the tournament, getting shut down in the Final Four, he did not respond very well to the situation. Duke was fed up with him, and at this point he basically had to shape up what he was doing or just be a career floor spacer, not the guy on the top of the key shooting out of high ball screens. He restructured his life in a way that was going to go back to leaving nothing on the table, and it really showed. His numbers took a big time jump to 22 a game, and he was a top player in the country his junior year. At this time, it was also very cool to hate on JJ Redick. It was so bad to the point where it almost got him to quit basketball altogether. Talking about it doesn't do it justice either. Every away game was like a 1,000,000-on-1. I mean, these were some of the most ruthless fans I've seen in sports. JJ was a Duke star whose confident swagger bordered on arrogance. Fans didn't like that. I mean, he was looked at as a spoiled prick, and whether that's true or not, they let him know about it. They said some of the most vile stuff imaginable to this kid. I mean, from threats to inappropriate remarks about his 12-year-old sister. It was bad. But he would respond in a way that made it one hell of a show. This guy was a killer, shutting up crowds with 30 bombs and waving them away as the clock runs out. I mean, it was must-see TV, the way this guy divided the most divisive group of people even more. He was ACC Player of the Year this year, in a season that saw pretty transformative development from just a couple years ago. But his senior year was when all the pieces finally came together. The most hated player in every stadium and the most loved player at home. JJ Redick was the best player in the country. The season was highlighted by a race for the scoring title against Gonzaga's Adam Morrison. The two were all-time scorers and unbelievable shooters at the college level. JJ came close to Morrison at 27 a game, setting a Duke record on elite efficiency. He was the face of college basketball and cemented himself as one of the best players in college basketball history. All-time leader in points scored for one of the most prosperous programs in sports. This was straight out of a movie and one of the best seasons in college history. He would pull up with FU confidence if he had a smidge of daylight. His conditioning was phenomenal, and the way this guy ran off screens and moved without the ball was poetry in motion, really. The team eventually fell in the Sweet 16, meaning JJ would never win his goal of an NCAA championship, but this closed out one of the greatest college careers that we'll ever see, and definitely the most storied one of any. He was a wild card. He was a first-round selection, but that's really all we knew at the time. He could go anywhere. Most people projected late lottery, but a lot of people thought this was the best scorer in the draft, while others, probably most, predicted that he was going to bust. A 6'4" two-guard who isn't fast, not a very talented passer, and isn't a good defender. He was the purest shooter in the draft, but that's all he had. Even he expected that he was going to come into the league and be a career role player. The JJ hype in college was significantly less than in the NBA, and I understand why. JJ's game, as effective as it was in college, might just not work in the NBA. They might just not have that role as a player. You're as tall as a point guard, but can't keep up with them defensively, lack the on-ball skills that a point guard needs, like creating and facilitating, but are kind of just too small for the two-guard slot as well. That mixed with some controversy, including a DUI arrest right before the draft and some possible back problems, show why he was taken number 11 in the draft while being one of the top college basketball players in history. Orlando wanted this guy, but not really that much. He was drafted onto a Magic team led by the emerging superstar in Dwight Howard. JJ slid in as a backup to an agent Grant Hill, with the 21-year-old Dwight Howard emerging into one of the most unstoppable forces in recent memory. These guys had a violent upswing. It was time to win some games, and a lot of the time this led to JJ not being able to see the floor. He was actually not that bad offensively. At times he looked a little more three-dimensional than I would have personally expected for him, but his defense was pretty lacking and Coach Hill wasn't really having it. 6 points in 15 minutes is a pretty slow start for the guy. The following year was even worse. He struggled with back spasms and new coach Stan Van Gundy would not play him at all. This team was really good and JJ just couldn't really catch the minutes. This, I imagine, was frustrating, and he voiced that online, saying even when he plays good, he'll just eat a DNP the next game and wasn't really rewarded for his good play ever. He requested a trade through his agent, but they didn't fold for it. They just kind of kept him where he was, and the JJ haters ate this up. I mean, people were waiting for him to fail, and putting up 4 points a game in his second year was the sign that they needed to say, "I told you so." JJ moved back to the middle of the bench the next year in a season that saw the Magic running all the way to the finals. He played pretty good, and really was never actually disappointing at all on the floor, to be honest. He worked really hard defensively, so he statistically kind of sat around league average while being statistically a phenomenal shooter. Either way, 3 years into an NBA career, never scoring more than 6 points a game, led to the B word being dropped on a regular basis. But after this year, that narrative kind of began to change. He started to crawl his way back into the rotation. He put up just short of 10 points a game in the first season where he actually saw a lot of basketball. This is when the bust narrative started to die and the less prevalent mismanagement narrative came to the mainstream. The Magic were a massively successful team, winning 59 games the last 2 years with a killer offense ranked 4th in the league, centered around Dwight and surrounded by shooters. JJ Redick really added to this, being statistically the best shooter on the team and one of the best in the league. Even defensively, he really wasn't that bad. This guy was in phenomenal shape and showed that on both ends. He would really work his ass off to keep up on defense. The past years he had an average defensive box plus minus, and offensively he proved to be a pretty brilliant off-ball player. He came off screens extremely well, could set his feet and get a shot off in any type of action. He really did have noticeable value on the floor, and he saw noticeable increases in production for the next few years, becoming another one of these shooters the Magic were pumping out. They lost Howard and moved on from this era, dumping JJ to Milwaukee, and this marked a huge turning point in his career. His time was actually super bunched with the Bucks, but what came after was much bigger for Redick's career. The Clippers found themselves in quite the unique scenario with insane amounts of talent on the team. After pairing Chris Paul with Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan, they had huge names, but this team had a problem offensively. The offense was just so stagnant. They had crazy ball handlers like Chris Paul and Jake Crossover, and the best pick and roll threats you could have, but their dribble drive offense was quite stoppable with the right game plan. They needed off-ball threats, and Doc Rivers knew exactly who to call. JJ had a very noticeable impact right away on the Clippers. They jumped to being the best offense in the entire league. It felt like JJ was finally having his breakout year at 29 years old. He put up 15 a game, redefining himself entirely. JJ was one of the best supporting pieces that you could have at this time in the NBA. He had a sky-high IQ and forced himself into the NBA's brightest lights. The Clippers would struggle for the next few years in the playoffs, but JJ Redick would go on to have some incredible seasons, proving to be one of the best shooters in the league. And as the game shifted towards a three-ball being a primary option, JJ proved to be one of the best shooters of all time. I mean, he had a crazy 47% in 2016. He was one of those role players who I would consider to be more valuable than certain low-level stars on certain teams. I mean, having a guy who can demand attention like that, doesn't need the ball, and really didn't even need CP to help him that much, makes him a piece that really contributes, and that's partly why he made the playoffs year after year after year. As the Clippers' run came to an end, JJ jumped ship to Philadelphia and at 33 years old went on to have some of the best years of his whole career, hitting career highs both seasons. He served as a phenomenal piece that creates immense value for what he brings as a shooter, a fantastic vocal leader, who was really one of the smartest players I've ever seen, and a guy who knew how to win on a team that really needed that kind of energy. As Father Time caught up to him and injuries started to plague, he hung him up, turning in one of the most wild basketball resumes in history. It's really crazy to think back at how he was remembered. I mean, college legend to a major bust to a guy who put together one of the more complete 15-year careers. This guy had a big role in the evolution of the game that really gets understated, and the competitive drive and high IQ shows why this guy is crushing it in his media career right now as well. To some he's a legend, to some he's still a bust, to some he's a prick, and to some he's a genius. All I know to this point is that this is the JJ Redick story. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you boys in the next one. Peace out.